$2.5 billion constitutes the amount of Russian funds that flowed through Deutsche Bank into Donald Trump's assets over the
Is
course of
lawful or
20
lawless to
years.
violate free speech?
That exact sum is what
That's
Stephen
lawless.
Mnuchin helped
Okay,
to
sounds
hide
about
after
right
he
because
took on the
we had to
position
have a
of
conversation
Treasury
about
Secretary.
Jimmy Kimmel, so I'm gonna say free
It also
Jimmy
equates
Kimmel
to the massive
for
amount of
sure,
evidence
and
Jasmine
hopefully we
Crockett
will
is
deal
presently
with the
reviewing,
FCC
which arrived in 6 cardboard
chairman. But the
boxes at
reason
her
that I wanted to
congressional
go
office
through
without any
that
return
long
address.
list, and that was
The
actually
courier
Fastest
avoided eye
economic
contact,
recovery from any
waited for no
crisis
signature,
in U.S. history.
merely dropped off the
I'm proud to
packages
say,
and
while there is
disappeared
still
quickly,
more work to be done,
proving to
that
be a
statement is
very
even more
cautious
true
individual.
today. In the third quarter,
Inside the
GDP
first
grew by
box stamped with red
33%
letters
at an
warning of
annual rate,
confidential
beating all
Deutsche Bank
expectations
internal
and
documents,
nearly
she finds
doubling the
1,000
previous
pages that
record set
someone
in
risked their life to
1950.
send her. These
Americans
materials
that
include
even the
financial
bill author
statements,
is
digital
not well
transfer
informed
records,
about
compliance
what
reports that were
his bill
filed and
does.
later buried
Because as
alongside
has already
suspicious
been
activity
stated,
alerts that
at
vanished from
the
government
age of
databases.
18, you are an adult.
The very first
So
email
this
she reads
idea
brings her to a
that
complete
somehow
standstill.
21-year-olds
Deutsche
Treasury
Bank
gained
executives in
58% of the
2014
lost
were
jobs.
discussing a loan
The
application
unemployment
from the
rate
Trump
decreased to
Organization
6.9%,
where
a
compliance
rate not
officers
expected to
highlighted
be
6
achieved until the
bankruptcies
fourth
and
quarter
multiple
of
past
2021.
defaults, recommending rejection before a loan command from
CARES Act
high-level
provided the
management ordered
economic
VIP
relief
approval
critical
for
to
the presidential
supporting our
candidate to
robust
proceed. She reads the communication 3 times before getting up to lock the door to her office. By the time evening falls, she has sorted the evidence into 6 separate color-coded notebooks, where red means Russia, blue stands for Deutsche Bank, green represents the Trump Organization, yellow is for FinCEN, orange points to Mnuchin, and black holds the undeniable smoking gun. Around midnight, she fully grasps the complete magnitude of the situation. A staggering $2.5 billion was laundered from Russian state-owned banks like Gazprom Bank, VTB, and VEB through Deutsche Bank, ultimately landing in Trump properties that would have otherwise gone bankrupt. Moreover, anytime compliance officials tried to file reports on questionable transactions, a specific person made those files disappear, someone holding authority over the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network who reported directly to President Trump. Stephen Mnuchin's signature appears on 17 separate suppression orders, each one restricting access to suspicious activity reports that would have exposed the entire scheme. She finds these documents stamped with official Treasury Department seals, carrying dates that stretch from April 2017 through May 2018. This represents a high-ranking cabinet official using his power to cover up serious financial crimes. This is textbook obstruction of justice, and it vastly outpaces the magnitude of the Watergate scandal. At 3 in the morning, her chief of staff Marcus finds her still sitting at her desk, surrounded by evidence that possesses the power to bring down an entire administration. He tells his boss that she really needs to leave and get some rest. She replies that she cannot sleep, tapping her finger forcefully on Mnuchin's signature across a restriction mandate. The committee hearing is scheduled for Thursday, just 3 days away, and she knows she has only one chance, a single window to ask questions on live television that he will not be able to dodge. Marcus warns her that this is incredibly dangerous, the exact kind of threat where people suffer tragic accidents and whistleblowers end up dead. She looks back at him and acknowledges the risk, but points out that a nameless source sent her this evidence because they believe she would actually do something with it. Marcus stays quiet for a long moment before finally asking what she needs from him. She immediately requests strong coffee, the witness list, and every single transcript of Mnuchin's previous testimonies under oath. He nods in understanding and walks out of the room. She pulls up video clips from Mnuchin's 2019 congressional appearance, where he effortlessly claimed that restricting access to suspicious activity reports was just standard procedure for ongoing investigations. She watches the committee members simply nod along and buy the excuse, noting how the hearing ended without a single negative consequence for him. That outcome is absolutely not going to happen this time around. This time, she holds the documents bearing his signature that prove it was never standard procedure, but rather a targeted campaign of suppression. This time, she has the internal Deutsche Bank email showing that top executives fully knew these loans were highly suspect. This time, she has the accounts of courageous whistleblowers who tried to warn the proper authorities and were fired for their efforts. This time, she holds the absolute truth, meticulously documented and impossible to dispute. She finally closes her laptop around dawn and walks the long route past the Capitol building, watching it glow against the lightning morning sky. Her grandmother cleaned bank branches for 40 years and had access to vaults holding millions, yet she never took a single penny that wasn't rightfully hers. These powerful men stole billions of dollars and operated under the assumption that they would never face any punishment. When Thursday afternoon arrives, she fully intends to prove how wrong they were. The committee room hits maximum capacity very early, with every single seat taken by 9:30, even though the proceedings are not scheduled to start until 10 o'clock. Crockett walks in at 9:45 and takes her place at the congressional dais, arranging her 6 colorful binders with careful, deliberate precision. She makes sure all the documents are in the perfect sequence, guaranteeing that she knows exactly where to find every piece of evidence the moment she needs it. All around her, the typical theatrical production of a congressional hearing unfolds, with staffers handing out memos, reporters checking their audio equipment, and C-SPAN cameras angling to capture every possible viewpoint. Stephen Mnuchin strides in at 2 minutes to 10, flanked by high-powered lawyers whose hourly billing rates could easily pay off the mortgages of average Americans. He looks exactly the part of a former Goldman Sachs banker who leveraged his Wall Street connections to secure a cabinet position, a man who spent 4 years assisting a president who owed him favors, and who currently thinks he can charm his way past one more committee before the public moves on. His tailored suit probably cost $5,000, his silk tie is clearly Hermes, and his expensive cufflinks catch the room's lighting as he sits down to exchange quiet words with his legal defense team. Crockett watches him arrange his notes, sees him pour a glass of water from the pitcher on the witness table, and notes how he surveys the room with the casual confidence of a man who has played this game before and knows all the rules. He does not look the least bit nervous. He really should be terrified. Chairman James Comer bangs his gavel exactly at 10 o'clock using a dramatic flair full of unnecessary energy, and begins his opening statement regarding Treasury Department oversight and the protection of America's financial systems from criminal exploitation. The deep irony of that last sentiment is obvious to anyone actually paying attention, although Comer himself appears completely oblivious as he reads through 5 minutes of prepared remarks that sound important but say absolutely nothing. The questioning period then begins, and for the first half hour it plays out exactly as anyone would expect from a typical partisan committee meeting. The Republicans toss softball questions that allow Mnuchin to brag about his supposed successes, while the Democrats try to score quick political points with broad inquiries that are far too easy for him to dodge. Everyone is merely acting for the television cameras and their campaign donors, while the actual duty of congressional oversight gets buried under a mountain of political theater. Crockett refuses to take part in the charade. She stays quietly seated at her designated spot, meticulously writing down her observations. She watches Mnuchin become more relaxed with every friendly question, noticing his lawyers slowly unclenching as it becomes clear to them that this will be just another session where nothing of substance happens. She patiently waits for her allotted time, using the delay to mentally review her questions one last time to guarantee that every single word hits its mark perfectly. At exactly 13 minutes to 11, Chairman Comer officially recognizes the representative from Texas for her 5 minutes of questioning. The mood in the hearing room shifts immediately, even if most of the people present could not exactly explain the reason for the change. Maybe it has to do with the way Crockett lifts her head from her papers, wearing an expression that is chillingly calm and entirely focused. It is the distinct look of a person preparing to reveal that they know exactly what crimes were committed and have the hard documentation to back it all up. Perhaps the shift happens because she refuses to smile, grandstand, or engage in any of the usual dramatic political stunts typical of these hearings. It might just be that the crowd can sense when something incredibly real is about to take place, knowing the standard script is about to be thrown out in favor of true accountability. She thanks the chairman, her voice carrying that unique quality of sounding conversational while still projecting clearly into every single corner of the large room. Addressing him as the former secretary, she suggests they talk about his conduct at the Treasury Department, specifically focusing on the things he deliberately hid from the public. Mnuchin's lead attorney suddenly leans forward, his body language signaling an awareness that this is no longer a simple inquiry, but rather a direct criminal accusation. Mnuchin starts to reply with a slick practice tone, stating that he does not quite understand the premise of her statement. Crockett sharply interrupts him, telling him he understands completely, her interjections slicing through his evasive tactics as if they were made of thin air. She pivots straight to Deutsche Bank, asking him to confirm his basic familiarity with the financial institution. The exchange that follows serves as a masterclass in conducting a cross-examination against a hostile witness who holds every possible advantage except the actual truth. Mnuchin tries to keep his composure, casually admitting he knows the major global bank since the Treasury regulates it while carefully distancing himself from daily operations. A defensive stance Crockett lets him establish just before she pulls out her first piece of evidence. She cites January 31st of 2017, holding up a legal settlement agreement so the broadcast cameras can capture it. She notes that Deutsche Bank was hit with a massive $425 million fine for laundering Russian money through a scheme known as mirror trading. Their New York branch managed to wash $10 billion of dirty Russian cash using a method so incredibly obvious that their internal compliance team was practically screaming about the violations. She reminds him that he was the Treasury Secretary at the time, directly asking if it was accurate that he oversaw this massive federal investigation. Mnuchin attempts to obscure the issue by claiming that FinCEN and other regulators handled the technical enforcement details while his role was purely administrative, but Crockett cuts off his complex bureaucratic excuses by demanding a simple yes or no answer as to whether he held the title of secretary. His legal team had specifically warned him about these binary traps, explaining how skilled trial lawyers use them to force uncooperative witnesses into impossible corners. However, Mnuchin had spent his entire professional life successfully talking his way out of difficult situations, leading him to believe he could easily outmaneuver this freshman representative. He offers a reluctant affirmative, but immediately tries to add that the probe actually began under the previous administration. Crockett cuts him off with a quick thank you, insisting a simple yes is enough, before she moves on to her next document, methodically building her argument like a brick wall of verified facts that he cannot deny without perjuring himself. She brings up the Deutsche Bank loans given to Trump, totaling $2.5 billion over a span of 2 decades. Not a single domestic bank would do business with him after his numerous bankruptcies, yet this specific institution kept advancing him money, approving financially illogical deals, and intentionally structuring loans to hide where the cash was actually coming from. She states that the situation gets even more interesting, bringing up copies of the loan agreements on the large digital monitor positioned right behind her desk. She explains that back in 2008, Trump failed to pay back a staggering $640 million loan. Rather than just defaulting, he actually took the bank to court, arguing that the global financial meltdown was entirely their responsibility. Amazingly, the bank's response to this lawsuit was to lend him another $48 million from a completely different department just so he could pay off his debt to them. A wave of quiet disbelief spreads across the viewing gallery, and even a few conservative lawmakers look baffled, as this level of financial absurdity easily transcends normal political divides. No rational financial institution gives more cash to a client currently suing them unless there is a hidden underlying arrangement taking place behind the scenes. She addresses the former secretary again, her voice adopting a sharp edge that compels everyone in the room to lean in closer to hear. She asks if, during his extensive career at Goldman Sachs, he ever saw a bank funnel money to a defaulting plaintiff just so that same borrower could pay the bank back. Mnuchin tries to argue that banking arrangements can be highly complex, suggesting there might be legitimate corporate reasons for such a setup, and claiming he lacks knowledge regarding the specific details of this individual case. Every excuse he offers sounds significantly weaker than the last, and the Congresswoman ignores most of his rambling, moving ruthlessly to the next question and presenting another undeniable document he cannot easily dismiss. Opening the red binder, she brings up Gazprom Bank, asking him to acknowledge his familiarity with the Russian financial entity. Mnuchin cautiously answers in the affirmative, his voice betraying his desperate struggle to regain his balance and figure out her ultimate destination with this line of questioning. Crockett clarifies that it is not merely a standard institution, but a state-operated entity largely controlled by the highest levels of the Russian government. She asks if it would shock him to learn that during the exact same year Trump received a massive loan for his Doral resort, this Russian entity wired $500 million directly into Deutsche Bank's American Trust subsidiary. She pulls out official bank ledgers, electronic routing receipts, and papers clearly labeled for restricted internal viewing. She announces to the room that these files are the bank's very own internal corporate records. These papers prove that a massive influx of Russian state funds passed through the very same financial channel that was simultaneously funding the president's real estate ventures. The hearing chamber
not even the
grows
half of it is
incredibly
because
quiet,
since this
making it
administration
feel
has
as if
come
the
in on January
ventilation system
20th,
itself
they
has
have
suddenly
engaged in
stopped
some
running.
form of every single thing
Continuing
that I
her
said on that
interrogation,
list,
she
even
reminds
the
him
part
of
about
his
covering for
oversight
pedophiles.
duties regarding
So,
financial crimes.
my question is,
directly
why are we
asking
sitting
if
here
he
today?
found it
Number one, they
alarming that
already
Russian
passed their
cash
bootleg
flowed into the
laws, and
bank,
it's clear.
while the
Getting
bank's
back to
cash
work.
flowed
The
straight to
October
the
jobs
president.
report showed that the economy has
Grinding
gained
his
back
teeth,
12
the
million
former
jobs
secretary
since
begins to
April,
argue
more
that
than
such
50%
serious
of all
accusations
lost
would demand
jobs due to the
substantial
pandemic.
proof.
The private
The
service
congresswoman
sector,
shakes her
which
head to
includes
stop
those
him,
industries that
her
were
voice
impacted
hardening
by
as
the
she
initial
firmly
economic
corrects him that
shutdown.
these are not
We're
mere
now somehow
allegations.
juveniles
She
under
insists they
DC
are
law. Is that
undeniable facts
accurate or
recorded in the
inaccurate?
bank's private
It was
archives,
inaccurate,
materials
misunderstood
handed
the
over
way
to
the
her
law
team
works.
by an
Correct.
informant known as
Could
Val
not
Brooks.
understand how to read the law
She
and decided
gestures
that they
toward
were
the
going to
seating
rewrite
area
the
where the
law and mess
whistleblower
up the
rises
law.
at the
And
mention
to
of his
be
name,
clear,
prompting all the
Additionally,
broadcast
economic
lenses to
shutdowns, however,
pivot and
continue
record
to
his face.
impair this remarkable progress
Lowering her tone
and
to
cause great
devastating
harm to
effect, she
American
explains
business and
that this man's
workers.
father was the
Based
bank
upon the
executive who
recent
originally
economic data,
uncovered
I
the
continue
massive
to
illicit
believe
laundering
that a
network.
targeted fiscal
He tried to
package
flag
is
the
the most
crimes through
appropriate.
proper corporate channels, but his superiors ordered him to stay quiet, ignore the illegalities, and consider the safety of his retirement funds. Tragically, in late January of 2014, the elder Brooks took his own life inside his London flat. His son took possession of his digital records, turning them over to federal authorities and eventually to her because the Bureau refused to act on the evidence. She shifts her focus back to an incredibly pale Mnuchin, asking him pointedly if the federal agencies were indeed ignoring the files. The resulting quiet is the kind that defines historical moments. It is not a lack of noise as shutter clicks and electronic humming persist, but rather the heavy presence of truth crashing directly into raw political power. Mnuchin eventually murmurs that he cannot discuss ongoing investigations, a feeble response that causes his own lawyers to cringe visibly. Crockett raises her volume for the very first time, her words slicing through the tension as she declares that there is no active investigation at all. She outlines the core issue, stating directly that he held concrete proof of illicit funds linking the president to Moscow and chose to bury it entirely. The next 20 minutes of her interrogation unfold as the most brutal and effective cross-examination anyone in that chamber has ever seen. She presents a series of financial warning documents that were legally required to be submitted, but were intentionally hidden. She brings up Tammy McFadden, the bank's compliance specialist who tried to flag the questionable accounts and was fired for her honesty. She details the exact timeline showing how alerts regarding Michael Cohen's shady transactions, which included massive payments from individuals tied to Russian billionaires, vanished from the federal database just as investigations into the administration were heating up. Following this, she deliberately opens up the bright orange folder. Displaying a paper dated early May of 2018, she identifies it as a supplemental directive bearing the former secretary's unmistakable signature at the bottom. This specific mandate drastically increased limitations on who could view these critical financial alerts. It explicitly blocked federal agents, regional prosecutors, and tax investigators from examining the files without obtaining special, direct permission from the Treasury Secretary himself. She raises the paper even higher in the air to ensure the broadcast lenses capture a perfectly clear image of it. Down at the bottom of the second page sits an authorization signature. She asks him if he would care to identify the person who signed that specific document. The clock hanging on the chamber wall reads exactly 13 minutes before 11 in the morning. He opens his mouth, closes it again, and glances at his legal team, who are scribbling frantically but have absolutely no viable escape route to offer him. Telling the truth means admitting to a crime, lying guarantees a perjury charge, and staying completely silent serves as a deeply damaging confession all on its own. Adopting a surprisingly soft and gentle tone, the Congresswoman calls his name once more. She reminds him that she is asking an incredibly simple and direct question. She asks if he personally authorized a mandate designed to hide the financial alerts that would have exposed the president's monetary crimes. The clock holds steady at 10:47. The former cabinet member stares blankly down at his own hands. 30 seconds tick by without a response. The television cameras stay locked onto his face, capturing every beat of sweat, every muscle twitch, and every micro-expression that highlights the frantic calculating happening inside his head. Someone in the gallery lets out a cough, and the sound echoes loudly through the tense room. A minute passes, and his lead attorney leans in close to whisper urgent advice into his ear. He shakes his head in response, the movement so small it is almost imperceptible. 15 seconds later, her voice cuts through the quiet, sounding perfectly patient, yet completely uncompromising. She reminds him that the entire room is waiting for his answer. At a resort in Florida, the former president is watching the live broadcast and screaming angrily at his television screen. Up in New York, a senior FBI agent is watching the feed with her squad, already piecing together the logistics for a massive criminal probe. In homes and workplaces all over the country, citizens are watching a once powerful official sit in total silence because honesty would ruin him, and deception is no longer an option. A full 89 seconds slowly slip away. Finally, the man speaks, his voice so quiet it barely registers above a faint whisper. He states that, acting on the advice of his lawyers, he refuses to answer the question to avoid incriminating himself under the law. The reaction inside the chamber is instantaneous and explosive. Conservative members yell out procedural complaints, liberal members demand immediate criminal referrals, journalists run for the doors to publish breaking alerts, and the chairman pounds his gavel repeatedly in a futile attempt to regain control. However, the representative from Texas is far from done. She rises from her chair, and her commanding voice easily pierces through the uproar, projecting the authority of the only person who grasps the true gravity of the moment. She mockingly points out that he is invoking his Fifth Amendment rights only after spending 3 hours bragging about his transparency and swearing he followed every single rule. Stepping away from her desk, she approaches the witness table, looking less like a politician and more like a fierce trial lawyer who just caught a dirty official in a massive lie, proving to the world that the entire system was deeply rigged. She decides to explicitly translate the meaning of his refusal to answer. She declares that his silence confirms his absolute undeniable guilt. She asserts that he fully knew the bank was laundering foreign funds for the president, and realizing the compliance reports would expose the plot, he intentionally buried them. She accuses him of weaponizing his cabinet position to hide massive financial felonies for a leader who demanded blind loyalty over legal compliance. Pointing at the large display monitor, she highlights a timeline showing every single suppression mandate, every halted probe, and every instance where he prioritized his boss over the nation. She tells him that his 89 seconds of absolute silence is the most deafening confession she has ever witnessed in her life. The days following the dramatic session blur into a rapid avalanche of fallout, with the repercussions seemingly growing heavier by the minute. Footage of his refusal to answer instantly explodes online, racking up tens of millions of views as commentators, comedians, and everyday citizens dissect the moment, universally agreeing that his quietness revealed everything. A specific hashtag referencing the exact duration of his silence dominates social media trends for an entire week. People across various digital platforms post videos of themselves sitting quietly for that exact time frame, demonstrating just how agonizingly long and incriminating that pause truly was. A popular late-night comedy show airs a skit featuring a corrupt politician who freezes silently under a massive ticking clock whenever faced with a difficult inquiry. The event spawns new cultural slang for undeniable guilt, with people casually referencing the time frame or using the official's name as a verb for staying silent. Yet the true impact unfolds inside corporate boardrooms far removed from the internet, where powerful executives make ruthless calculations about who must be sacrificed to protect their lucrative empires. Just 2 days after the broadcast, The bank's board of directors holds a crisis meeting and determines that total submission to federal investigators is their only chance at survival. The chief executive officer travels directly to Manhattan to broker a deal with the Justice Department, resulting in an incredibly harsh settlement agreement. The terms include over $3 billion in penalties, total transparency regarding the president's accounts, criminal charges for complicit executives, and 10 years of strict government oversight over their domestic branches. Within a matter of days, the corporation terminates 3 high-ranking officials. The private wealth manager who had spent years designing the president's most suspicious financial packages is fired for gross misconduct and denied any exit compensation. The head of the wealth management department abruptly steps down to explore new ventures, a classic corporate euphemism for a forced resignation to avoid a public firing. The supervisor who had previously threatened the whistleblower and suppressed her compliance reports is not only ousted but also handed over to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. The chief executive then publishes a video address that explodes across the internet for completely different reasons than the congressional hearing. Standing before a blank wall without any corporate branding, looking incredibly tired and worn down, he utters an admission virtually never heard from major financial leaders, a complete acknowledgement of failure. He openly confesses that the bank knew the deals were fraudulent and financially absurd, admitting they should have followed regulatory laws and rejected the business but deliberately chose to ignore the rules instead. He admits that the institution prioritized massive financial gains over basic ethical standards by choosing to turn a blind eye to the crimes. He then specifically addresses the fired compliance officer by name, acknowledging her diligent efforts to stop the fraud. He tells her clearly that she was correct, the bank was at fault, and offers a direct public apology. The public statement is shocking not for its theatricality, but simply because such total corporate surrender is entirely unheard of in modern finance. Massive global companies practically never admit to breaking the law. They usually just pay fines while refusing to accept legal liability before returning to business as usual. However, this executive realizes that saving his bank requires absolute honesty, knowing the only path forward involves a confession so complete that it violently cleanses the company of its corrupt history. Over in Queens, the former compliance officer watches the apology clip nearly 24 times. She had spent the last 6 years pouring coffee, her professional life ruined by malicious corporate rumors painting her as a crazy, vindictive employee. Suddenly, the leader of the massive conglomerate that ruined her life is looking into a camera and publicly confirming she was unjustly punished for doing the right thing. She breaks down in tears during the first dozen viewings, not out of happiness, but from an overwhelming sense of relief that feels like exhaling after years of suffocation. The resulting financial compensation she receives from the bank allows her to clear her educational debts and secure a modest home. Yet the vindication of her personal reputation matters far more than any monetary payout, as the world finally knows she was never the unstable liar they claim she was. Lucrative employment offers flood in instantly from institutions desperate to prove their ethical standards, federal bureaus needing seasoned fraud experts, and advisory groups valuing an employee who refused to bow to corrupt pressure. She ultimately accepts a senior leadership role at the Securities and Exchange Commission, a job that allows her to shield future informants and build structures that reward bravery just as the Congresswoman had done for her. During her first morning in the new office, she frames a still image from the dramatic congressional session, the exact second she stood up in the gallery despite her terror, fully embracing the truth. The son of the deceased executive experiences a very similar journey of redemption after spending years being treated like a conspiracy theorist. He had safeguarded his father's secret documents for more than 10 years, watching multiple federal probes collapse and constantly wondering if his father's tragic sacrifice had been completely pointless. Finally, the records his father died for are dismantling corrupt corporate structures, exposing the highest levels of political rot, and proving that his brave attempt to stop the crimes was entirely justified. He authors a gripping autobiographical book detailing the massive laundering plot and his father's demise. It rockets to the top of the sales charts precisely because it provides a rigorously factual account of a family's fight against powerful silencers. He gives away all his book profits to mental health charities and launches a legal defense fund for corporate informants, aiming to ensure that no one else is ever driven to despair for speaking out against greed. During the charity's opening gala, he delivers a profound address that becomes required reading in university ethics courses for decades. He explains that his father died believing his bravery was totally useless, convinced he had lost his life fighting a conspiracy that would never see the light of day. However, he notes that bravery is never truly squandered, and the truth is never without purpose. He states that while justice can take years and often requires a relentless advocate willing to chase the facts down every dark hallway, it is always worth the effort. He concludes that the truth inevitably surfaces, and when it finally breaks free, everyone who suffered to protect it finds ultimate vindication. The Justice Department probes sparked by the dramatic session explode with an unbelievable level of aggression and velocity. Within 2 days, federal agents in Manhattan launch a massive task force, assigning dozens of operatives to spend the next quarter building the largest white-collar criminal indictment in the nation's history. Investigators issued demanding legal subpoenas to every single global bank that ever interacted with the tainted cash flow. They interrogate countless individuals, from the mid-level bankers who spotted the fraud and the executives who ignored them, to the federal workers who watched the cover-up unfold from inside the administration. Agents map out nearly $3 billion in questionable real estate financing, proving that hundreds of millions originated directly from foreign government accounts. They secure physical evidence of 17 separate internal bank memos advising against doing business with the president, all of which were overridden by greedy higher-ups. They find digital correspondence from the president's chief financial officer admitting the loan sources looked incredibly sketchy, but choosing to remain willfully ignorant since the cash cleared just fine. The prosecutors construct their criminal case against the former cabinet secretary so perfectly that his incredibly expensive defense lawyers can find absolutely zero loopholes to slip through. They gather damning communication logs, sworn statements from bullied federal workers, hard copies of the suppression mandates, and direct testimony from colleagues who overheard the plot to bury the financial probes. Just 90 days after the congressional showdown, a federal grand jury officially charges Steven Mnuchin with 17 major felonies, including racketeering, conspiracy, and massive bank fraud. The inclusion of organized crime statutes dominates the news cycle, signaling that the government views the former official as a key mobster in a massive criminal syndicate. The devastating legal news drops right before the weekend, and within an hour every major television station breaks into their regular programming to cover the indictment. His defense team issues a weak press release claiming political persecution, but the public ignores it completely, unable to forget the agonizing televised silence when he refused to explain his own signature. Down at his private club, the former president angrily posts about partisan witch hunts, though his trembling hands reveal he fully grasps the fatal threat this indictment poses to his own freedom. If his loyal lieutenant is facing decades in prison for covering up the boss's crimes and decides to strike a plea deal, every single corrupt order and secret conversation they ever shared will be handed straight to the authorities. Every illegal command, every demand to bury an investigation, all of it will become admissible trial evidence directly linking the president as the mastermind of the entire criminal enterprise. The situation becomes inescapable. The evidence is so bulletproof and the witnesses so abundant that even his staunchest political allies begin privately telling him to prepare for total defeat, knowing his usual tactics of legal bullying and endless delays will not save him this time. Sitting alone in his massive home a few weeks later, the disgraced official stares at the legal paperwork methodically tearing his privileged life into tiny pieces. He reviews the strict bail terms, the draft plea deals, and the confession documents where he must completely sell out his former boss in exchange for a prison sentence short enough to let him die a free man. His spouse abandoned the residence shortly after the arrest, fleeing to another state with their kids and completely severing all communication with him. One of his children even posted a viral, heartbroken message online about discovering the horrifying truth behind her father's public persona. Conservative media networks fired him immediately, prestigious universities canceled his speaking engagements, and the government quietly removed his painted portrait from their headquarters. Sitting in the dark, he glares at his mobile device, having begged his former boss for guidance regarding the prosecutor's pressure to flip, only to receive a deafening, terrifying silence in return. The president is ghosting him in the exact same manner he ghosted the congressional committee, an ironic parallel that offers absolutely zero humor in his current desperate situation. His highly paid attorney had bluntly informed him the day before that incarceration was unavoidable, leaving only the duration of his sentence up for negotiation. The lawyer explained that complete and total betrayal of the president regarding every single corrupt act might reduce his prison time to roughly a decade. Alternatively, going to trial and refusing to cooperate would likely result in a life sentence, guaranteeing he would die behind federal bars. When he asked if his old boss had offered any support, his lawyer simply showed him a recent message where the president coldly ordered him to cease all direct contact immediately. After half a decade of total subservience, illegally blocking probes, and risking his own freedom, his leader tossed him aside with a brief, soulless text the moment the scheme imploded. Consequently, he opens his computer to review the immunity contract, staring at the clause demanding his absolute honesty regarding every illegal act committed by the president, the bank, and his former colleagues. He begins writing out his confession, detailing a phone call he received from the Oval Office mere days after taking his cabinet oath. He types out how the commander-in-chief complained about hostile probes into his private finances, specifically naming the bank and framing the investigators as corrupt partisans. He documents how the president directly asked him to use his federal authority to derail those specific criminal inquiries. His hands pause over the keys, realizing the immense gravity of the cliff he is about to jump off. The second he finishes this document and emails it to the authorities, he permanently crosses the line into becoming a star witness against his former master. The president's fiercely loyal base will brand him a turncoat, right-wing networks will shred his reputation, and his old boss will launch a massive campaign to paint him as a terrified, untrustworthy liar. However, the only other option available is perishing inside a concrete federal cell. Choosing silence means letting the mastermind escape justice completely while he absorbs the entirety of the punishment for their shared felonies. It means throwing away his life to protect an incredibly selfish man who had already discarded him without the slightest hesitation. He resumes typing his confession, admitting he promised the president he would try to fix the problem. He admits to ordering federal regulators to create massive bureaucratic roadblocks specifically designed to hide the president's financial alerts. He clarifies that every official involved fully knew this special protection was exclusively meant for the president's inner circle. He outlines how he spent the next year legally suffocating the very reports designed to catch massive banking fraud. He clearly states that he executed this cover-up on direct presidential orders, fully aware that the hidden documents contained evidence of massive financial crimes. His confession flows out onto the screen faster than his brain can fully process the catastrophic damage his words will cause. He documents every corrupt meeting, every command to kill an investigation, and every demand for protection, knowing that all of these interactions are easily verifiable through White House records and establish a massive, ongoing criminal conspiracy. He saves the file, hesitates briefly, and then emails the devastating confession to his attorney with a simple instruction to hand it over to the Justice Department. His phone instantly lights up with an incoming call from a burner device linked to the president's son-in-law, proving exactly how terrified the inner circle has become. He ignores the call completely, letting it drop to his answering machine. He is absolutely finished throwing his life away for a group of people who would happily watch him rot in a cell without shedding a single tear. Gazing out his window, he spots the media crews still staked out on his property deep into the night, their heavy lighting cutting through the gloom. By the next morning, when the world learns he has flipped, that media circus will explode, and he will forever be known as the man who destroyed a presidency simply by abandoning his silence and telling the brutal truth. The actual criminal trial is delayed for another half a year. Government lawyers need that time to ensure their case is completely impenetrable, running down every single lead before attempting the unprecedented feat of prosecuting a former commander-in-chief. However, the devastating nature of the impending trial becomes obvious as massive leaks and a tidal wave of plea deals show countless allies abandoning the sinking ship to save themselves. The president's top financial officer surrenders completely once the FBI presents hard proof that he personally engineered the illicit foreign transactions. The former fixer supplies even more damning testimony regarding the fake corporations and payoffs that form the backbone of the entire laundering operation. A previously devoted aide tells the grand jury exactly how the president panicked over the bank probes, demanding that his cabinet secretary intervene and bury the problem immediately. Before the first juror is even seated, the government possesses dozens of cooperating insiders, thousands of pages of hard evidence, and an exhaustive confession from the former Treasury head detailing the boss's absolute control over the crimes. The proceedings stretch over 2 grueling months, exposing massive daily scandals regarding the original fraud, the massive cover-up, the grotesque abuse of federal authority, and the blatant compromising of national security to protect a personal fortune. The Congresswoman takes the witness stand during the 6th week, spending hours guiding the jury step by step through her meticulous tracing of the illicit cash flow from Russia directly into the president's pockets. The lead attorney plays the viral footage of her congressional interrogation, forcing the jury to watch that agonizing silence before asking her to interpret its meaning. She explains that whenever a highly educated official refuses to answer a straightforward question, it is always because they are fully aware the honest answer proves their guilt. She clarifies that they recognize lying brings new charges, while honesty brings a confession, leaving them trapped in their own silence. She concludes that such a prolonged, terrified silence is functionally identical to a full, screaming confession. The defense attorneys aggressively attempt to rattle her during cross-examination, desperately trying to paint her as a biased political hack executing a partisan hit job. But she is a veteran of hostile courtrooms, having spent years battling lawyers who tried to dismiss her as overly emotional or entirely out of her depth. She easily maintains her icy composure, gracefully sidestepping their rhetorical traps while calmly reminding the jury that hard evidence remains completely factual regardless of political affiliation. When she finally finishes her testimony, even the most dedicated partisans in the crowd look visibly shaken, unable to deny the overwhelming mountain of bank ledgers, digital correspondence, and eyewitness accounts. This is the exact type of concrete proof that completely ignores political loyalties, cultural battles, or domestic policy disputes. It consists purely of cold, documented, and entirely undeniable facts. The jury returns its decision late on a Friday afternoon following nearly a week of intense debate. The lead juror, a dedicated teacher who insisted on thoroughly reviewing every single piece of evidence despite her own personal biases, stands up to deliver a verdict that alters the course of history. She loudly pronounces the defendant guilty on the primary charge of massive financial laundering. She quickly follows up with guilty verdicts for conspiracy, ultimately convicting him across the board on all 32 felony charges. The former president sits completely paralyzed at his table, his expressions rapidly shifting between shock, absolute fury, and genuine terror, entirely lacking a counterattack or any possible way to manipulate the devastating loss. His defense team rapidly files paperwork for an appeal, though every legal expert in the room knows the evidence was too spectacular to ever be overturned, and that a jury would never take down a president without absolute certainty. The official sentencing occurs a few months down the line, delivering a punishment even more unprecedented than the original conviction. The presiding judge, having endured countless death threats and desperate attempts to remove him from the bench, hands down the penalty with the solemn precision of a man fully aware he is writing legal history. Staring directly into the convicted man's eyes, he reminds him that a jury of average citizens found him guilty of dozens of severe financial felonies spanning over 20 years. He stresses that these were not simple administrative mistakes, but highly organized criminal plots designed to steal money, cheat the tax system, and weaponize the highest office in the land for personal protection. The judge takes a long pause, allowing the immense weight of his words to settle over the quiet room. He chastises the man for displaying absolutely zero regret, refusing to acknowledge his victims, and harboring the delusional belief that federal laws simply did not apply to him. He points out that the defendant blamed absolutely everyone in the world for his predicament, except the one man actually responsible for committing the crimes. He declares that such aggressive, unyielding arrogance serves as a massive aggravating factor in determining the punishment. The defense attorneys brace themselves, fully anticipating the devastating blow about to fall. The magistrate forcefully sentences him to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, completely stripping away any possibility of parole or early freedom. He orders the defendant to surrender his freedom to the authorities within exactly 1 month. Pandemonium erupts in the gallery as loyalists scream while detractors cheer, forcing the judge to restore order while the convicted man sits at his desk looking as though he aged 10 years in half a minute. A 15-year sentence for a 78-year-old man means he will not taste freedom again until his mid-90s, assuming he even survives the ordeal. His legal team frantically files emergency motions begging for house arrest or specialized security arrangements, desperate to prevent a former commander-in-chief from actually stepping foot inside a real prison cell. Every single request is harshly rejected, and a month later, on a very ordinary-feeling morning, he surrenders to authorities, endures a strip search, poses for a mugshot in an orange jumpsuit, and receives his federal inmate number. The fact that his inmate number starts with the number 89 is a random computer coincidence, though conspiracy theorists view it as deliberate mockery, while his critics consider it poetic justice. The exact duration of his accomplice's devastating silence becomes forever permanently attached to his federal prison identity. His tiny cell at the federal facility consists of 80 square feet of concrete, featuring a basic bed, a steel toilet, and a tiny desk secured directly to the wall. Locked inside that box for nearly the entire day during his initial intake month, he has absolutely nothing to do but sit in isolation and obsess over the precise sequence of events that destroyed his life. He fixates on all the past financial failures that should have permanently barred him from ever securing another massive corporate loan. He dwells on the endless streams of foreign cash that miraculously saved his empire when domestic lenders completely abandoned him. He stews over the blatant financial warnings that honest workers tried to elevate before corrupt bosses suppressed them. He thinks about all the massive federal investigations his loyal cabinet member managed to bury. He agonizes over every single corrupt decision, lie, and cover-up where he prioritized his personal wealth over the law, fully believing that punishment was something only ordinary citizens faced. Every single illicit act was perfectly documented and relentlessly tracked straight back to him by a determined representative from Texas, who realized that corruption only thrives when honest people refuse to act. He had built his entire criminal empire on the arrogant assumption that the public would simply look the other way forever. That single massive error in judgment proved to be the exact thing that brought about his absolute ruin. A full decade after that legendary committee session, Jasmine Crockett stands proudly in the Capitol building to receive the highest possible civilian award the government can offer. The official plaque praises her immense bravery in dismantling systemic political rot and proving definitively that absolutely no citizen is immune from the consequences of the law. She takes the stage and delivers a very short acceptance address that ends up being memorized by government students for generations to come. She humbly insists the award belongs to the brave whistleblowers who sacrificed their families, their careers, and their personal safety to expose the powerful elites who believed they were untouchable. Following the prestigious event, she heads straight back to her workspace, where fresh stacks of documents await her, featuring new corrupt officials committing similar abuses of power. The core issue remains the same. The wealthy and powerful constantly build corrupt systems to protect themselves from punishment, while average citizens are crushed by the legal system for the smallest mistakes. Her longtime aide, having recently graduated from law school, brings her a warm drink and gently asks if she ever considers giving up the endless, exhausting fight against invincible giants. She looks at him and honestly admits that she considers quitting every single day of her life. She immediately adds that she always remembers her grandmother, a woman who spent 40 years scrubbing bank floors next to open vaults but never stole a dime because she possessed true integrity. She points out that the elites she targets gladly steal billions while arrogantly assuming they will never face a judge. Stating that someone must step up to hold them accountable, she flips open the next file and immediately begins her research. The grueling mission never truly ends because greed is infinite, and ensuring true justice requires relentless dedication from those willing to dig through the boring, ugly details to find the truth. Just outside her office window, the massive dome of the Capitol building shines brightly against the darkening sky. Inside the room, she gears up for the next major probe, the next tense showdown where another corrupt leader will be forced to choose between painful honesty and convenient perjury. Meanwhile, citizens all across the country draw inspiration from her relentless crusade, realizing that bravery spreads rapidly and the justice system can actually function if someone is bold enough to force it. The path of the stolen funds was incredibly complex, involving 20 years of crime, months of intense scrutiny, and an agonizing 89-second pause that ultimately blew the entire conspiracy wide open. Yet she tracked that path to its very conclusion, digging through fake corporations and buried financial alerts until the evidence led her straight to the undeniable truth. Ultimately, the truth always prevails regardless of how violently the powerful try to destroy it, because eventually even the deepest silence screams the facts.